Okay guys, so here's the thing. This is the third phone that objectively seen should completely blow me away. But for some reason it doesn't. I really love the P9. I really love the P9 Lite. So why don't I love this one so much? And the other two phones, just in case you care about or want to know, HTC 10 and Nexus 6P. I don't really know why, but I would say I will go through the detailed part as objectively as I can, and maybe you can tell me later on why that could be the reason. Okay, let's get to the design part. The first thing that I already mentioned in the 24-hour later video is the odd backing, because it is kind of clear coated, and even though it looks like metal, and it is metal, it feels more like a glass on glass phone, which for me is actually quite good because it felt very grippy, it felt very nice, but it picks up more fingerprints, and some people just don't like a glass phone, and it's not quite a glass phone, but it definitely feels more like an actual metal phone. In terms of size, I have to say it is a little bit odd, because what I like too much on the P9 doesn't work quite so well on the P9 Plus because of the bigger size. Therefore, it feels a little bit more unwieldy. It still is a very compact phone because you can see the bezels are really small, and it is a really compact phone after all, but it doesn't work quite so well because, for example, just here the Alcatel Idol 4S has pretty much the same size in every aspect as you can see here, and yet it feels noticeably easier to handle. So this is a little bit of an odd thing, but I don't really care too much about it. That's just my opinion with my meaty short fingers. The fingerprint reader actually is very fast, but you will maybe notice this. The screen doesn't turn on so fast because, as you can see here, I will just tap and it turns on, but the screen itself needs a little bit longer. So this is just something to keep in mind. Here we have the two cams, the flash. Here we have the microphone, IR blaster, SD card and SIM card tray. The really nice sides because they are beveled but feel very, very round. So I really like that. The speaker that works in combination with the earpiece, I will get to that later. USB Type-C, microphone, and the headphone jack. And once again, the pretty much perfect buttons, because the placement is not just exactly where I want it to be, but they sound and feel so premium. A really amazing tactile feedback. So overall, they did a great job. So I can't complain about it at all because they did a great job. We have a notification LED, which is nice to see. And we don't have double tap to wake, even though it's not really necessary because everyone will use the fingerprint reader or the power button anyways. So there is nothing that I can add anymore. I definitely prefer the feel of the P9 for some reason. I like the backing actually here, so this is hit and miss for me personally. So I would say let's get to the display, and that is also something where I'm just not blown away, because even though the calibration is spot on, the white balance is absolutely perfect, and you can adjust it in the settings. The black due to AMOLED is absolutely top spot on with amazing contrast levels, and even the colors, yes, they are a little bit oversaturated, and yes, they are a little bit boosted, but in a way that I can completely accept it, and I like it because I like the pop of the AMOLED display. So they found a really great balance here. But what is for me a little bit of a downer is the resolution after all, because we have a 1080p AMOLED display, and yes, this is noticeably less sharp than, for example, a 1080p IPS display, and you would need to get the sharpness of a 1080p IPS display at least a 1440p LCD or AMOLED display. And yes, I have the proof here because I have the Alcatel Idol 4S, which has a 1440p AMOLED display, and that one feels noticeably sharper than the 1080p. So don't get me wrong, in normal use, the 1080p AMOLED display does a great job, but on a flagship of this caliber, in this price range of around 650 euros, I expect something more. So it's still good, but you will definitely notice that it is not the sharpest out anymore. The overall qualities, the rest is great because it is very bright, even though sunlight readability wasn't that great for some reason, and the viewing angles are top spot on, but it didn't quite convince me enough for this price. Now, let's see what I have to talk about. The sound. So we have a speaker arrangement similar to the HTC 10. So mids and lower ends are on the bottom firing, and on the front we have the highs. Even though it feels a little bit more extreme here, I feel that the highs are a little bit weaker compared to the HTC 10, and therefore you definitely notice once you block the bottom firing one. But overall the sound is very loud, definitely more than loud enough, and the balance is actually a little bit better than it was on the HTC 10 in my opinion. It feels a little bit nicer. Cupping will still help because we have mid still after all from the bottom, and then cupping still helps. And we have a nice amount of bass, we have really nice clear highs and mids, so overall the sound is absolutely top notch. The next best thing I would say to a front-facing stereo speaker, but not quite a match for something like the Idol 4S, which has an amazing speaker. One thing that is still a little bit disappointing though is the headphone jack quality, because it can't deliver a great experience. I tried it yesterday with a few different headphones, and even on an earphone, it's just about okay. What is definitely way better than okay though is the performance, and as you can see, no apps preloaded, so everything will be as you see it, and you will also see the launch times therefore. And let's try to get that right. As you can see here, the site is loaded, and it does that really quickly. As you can see here, browsing experience is absolutely top notch, couldn't be any better, so this is on the best possible level. Here we have, now I changed from Phoenix actually to Flamingo just to see it. As you can see, the performance is absolutely top notch after all. Super smooth. There is a little bit more lag than on the, for example, G5 or Samsung Galaxy S7, but it performs absolutely top notch. I would say besides those two phones, maybe also along with the HTC 10, which is more kind of closer towards this phone, the performance is still top notch because very smooth, very responsive. The screen is actually crazy responsive because we have force touch, which is a little bit extreme because I could actually scroll sometimes. It's a little bit hard to demonstrate here without even touching the screen. So screen response is top, the display is top, the responsiveness and the multitasking with 4 GB of RAM is absolutely on a top-notch level, so nothing to complain here. It is, I would say, a top 3 performer, not quite on the level of an LG G5 and Samsung Galaxy S7 in terms of smoothness, and it sometimes had a little bit more lag, even though I think so more than the P9, but this is a little bit of a, thing of perception. What else? The gaming performance is absolutely really good as well, because maybe the Mali GPU isn't quite as good as on the Snapdragon 820, but therefore it only has to push 1080p, and that one makes a great experience. So after all, games ran very smooth, absolutely fine, didn't really overheat, and you can see the values on the screen. It never got above 39 degrees, so all good here, and even the camera reached just 38 after 20 minutes of recording, so heat is absolutely no problem, no throttling or anything like that. So I'm really pleased with the gaming performance and also with the heat. Now let's get to the battery, and the last value on the 100% could be wrong because the battery charges very quickly. I had the quick charger here in the box, and I for some reason lost the 100% value. So I would expect something at around 1 hour 45 and maybe 1 hour 50. Not quite sure what happened with that value. The battery life though is a little bit weaker than I expected, because it's not weak, it's still very good, and it's on a level, for example, on a P9 Lite, because I could get close to at least 4.5 to maybe even, something like that on data only, 5 hours and maybe a little bit above in mixed use, and 6 hours easily on Wi-Fi only. What I've noticed though is, for example, when I was at 50%, things looked like I could even reach 7 hours, and the lower I get in terms of battery percentage, the more odd the battery behaved, because then it gradually went down from, it looks like 7, it looks like 6 hours, and then it was just 5 hours. So that was a little bit odd, and I had one very bad standby drain of like in 6 hours 23%. Once I reboot the device, the next time it was like 3 or 4%, so all good here. So I would say it's still above average and amongst the better one, but it can definitely compete with something like the Samsung Galaxy S7 Edge, which has a better battery life. So, software. And yeah, it's still EMUI, not really much has changed. As you can see, we still have this, we have the rearrangeable quick settings, all is good here. You have the theming engine where you can get on Android and theme, you can check that in my Honor 5C or something similar review. We have a nice little customizations here. I still like this quick recent apps. And what else? We have knuckle gestures, as you can see, for dual window. And in my 24-hour video, I told that actually there is no app that supports it. But that's actually not true, because I found like one, and that was like the audio or the music app. That's pretty much the only app that it supports it. We also have double tap, and we have knuckle gestures, as you can see here. Didn't really launch anything because I didn't make the proper one. So we have those, and we have force touch that I think is a complete gimmick, because what it can do is you have to press harder and then you can zoom in. How useful that really is something that you have to decide, because I didn't really find any use for it. It's a nice gimmick, but paying so much more for this, I don't know. But the software on its own is definitely solid. The only thing that you still have to remember about EMUI, software updates will come a little bit slower, but at least there should be a big change with EMUI 5.0. So once it gets to, I would say the Mate 9, you sometimes around that later could expect it on here. It's still very, very solid since Marshmallow, so I don't really have any complaints here either, but it's definitely not the most popular UI. So keep that in mind. I'm fine with it because I've used it so much in the recent past. So yeah, it definitely needs a little bit of time to get used to because you don't have an app drawer or something like that, but underneath there, it's still Android. About the camera qualities, I'm actually not quite sure why I wasn't really that impressed by it on the P9, because once I did the testing here, I actually have to say, one thing that is a difference is the selfie quality, because we have autofocus, and this is definitely noticeable because pictures are super sharp and every time in focus the exposure is great, colors look very natural. Sometimes the autofocus a little bit on a wider range if it's a little bit further from the object. Didn't every time get it right, but still an impressive and one of the very best selfie cameras. Low light is not quite that great, but I have to say the weather was a little bit weaker today, so it's maybe not the very best low light shooter, but still very good. So don't get me wrong, it's just maybe compared to the very best one, not on that level. Once you go outside, and yes, you will see that it wasn't the best weather, and for some reason all my good weather pics got kinda lost in the process. I'm not sure, but it turns out really sharp. Shutter times aren't super fast, the autofocus isn't super fast, but very close to the top after all. The exposure is quite nice. It tends to maybe sometimes overexpose a little bit, but it's still really, really nice. You have a nice HDR kind of feel because it picks up a lot of colors and light and everything else due to the dual camera arrangement. So it after all makes a great photo shooter for pics. And if I would have had a little bit better weather, you would have seen that a lot better. But I didn't get to make any pics in a better weather because it wasn't good anymore. The video camera is actually odd as well, because for some reason I now have what I always complained about not having, especially on the P9. I have autofocus on the camera. I'm not quite sure why that's the case here on the P9 Plus, but I definitely know to appreciate it. It's not always super reliable. Sometimes it just didn't get the object quite right, but what it does is it is quite fast and it makes it in one smooth move, so it doesn't really pump or something like that. So it's really nice to see that kind of autofocus, and the overall picture quality is still, I would say, very good, but not great, because just not super sharp, not really clear, a little bit washed in, but overall very good. So don't get me wrong. And once again, considering the bad weather, amazing for selfies, very, very good, and up with the very best ones for pictures, and still very good for videos, and especially for a Huawei device, definitely the best one so far. So in the end, why am I not so convinced about this phone? And I don't really know, because you can see the pros and cons here on the screen, and you will see there are a lot of pros and not that many cons, and those cons actually are very subjective. So I don't know. Maybe it is the size after all, but usually in a review, I don't really it doesn't really matter that much for me, and this is a top-notch phone. All the qualities are on a high end, if not flagship level, on the very best kind. So this sounds a lot odd, and this sounded even weirder, but don't get me wrong, I think for the price maybe it's the reason, because it costed around 650 euros, which is more than some of the other flagship costs these days. So price will fall, I guess, still, but you've seen the pros and cons and you've seen the detailed part, and that's why I don't really want to add too much to the kind of subjective conclusion, because it could sound that I'm not impressed by this phone, but it is an amazing phone. But as I said, similar to the Nexus 6P back then and an HTC 10, I don't quite feel it so much, and I'm not sure why, because like I said, the P9 Lite is a wonderful phone. The top 2 phone, I would say, at the moment, and the P9 Lite is the best budget phone. So even though this has definitely advantages over the P9, for example, it has the better front-facing camera, it has the better speaker, it doesn't have the better display though, and the feel in hand is a little bit more awkward. The battery life is also a little bit better, and we have a few more software things, like for example Force Touch, which I think at the moment is definitely a gimmick, and we have the knuckle adjuster, which we had on the P9 as well though. I forgot that. But yeah, dual window is there, but pretty much unusable. So not stretch it anymore. You know all. And if you don't know anything that I maybe didn't mention, just leave them down in the comments if any questions or something like that. And I won't really stretch it too far, so I would say just subbed up and rub. Until next time, bye.